We want to talk this morning a little bit about strategic sourcing. I'm a former 1102, and I just sense, I feel that there's a lot of 1102s in this room right now. I can feel that, right? Yeah, hoorah. How many 1102s do we have here? Very nice. Oh, I feel right at home. And I still know the secret handshake, by the way. I checked with Bob this morning, and I still know that. So anyway, okay. What we'd like to do is go through our presentation, and then at the end, we'll address any questions that you might have. So please feel free, once we finish with the presentation, to ask any questions or any clarifications that might pop into your head, okay? All right, let's start with a real basic overview. How many of you folks have been involved in any kind of strategic sourcing? Okay, not too many. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll just give you a very quick overview of strategic sourcing and how it's supposed to work and some of the theory and some of the thoughts behind it. And let's see if this works. Yes, it works. What is strategic sourcing? Well, it's defined a couple of different ways, but primarily it's a disciplined approach to procurement that includes a number of things. It's supposed to include a streamlined acquisition process to make the process more efficient. That's one of the goals. It's supposed to analyze and forecast spending patterns for agency products and services. This is called a spend analysis, and we will talk about that in just a few moments. Just want to make sure I'm not on the right slide, am I? Okay, excuse me, my slides were just a little out of order. But let me give you an OMB definition first. It's a collaborative and structured process of analyzing and organizing an organization's spend and using the information to make business decisions about acquiring commodities and services more efficiently and effectively. The expected benefits of strategic sourcing. There's expected cost savings. You know, it's a pretty basic concept, something that is probably something that we all have experienced in our own personal life. When you buy in bulk, when you buy in quantity, you normally can get better prices, right? You go to Costco or Sam's Club, you can normally get better prices than when you buy from 7-Eleven. So that's basically the theory behind it. It also enables visibility into agency spend. How much are we spending? What are we spending our money on? And who are we buying from? It's the other important tenet of strategic sourcing. It also is supposed to include process optimization. We all know as 1102s, or as a former 1102, that sometimes the process, while I believe a sound process overall, can be a little challenging sometimes. Certainly our customers see our process or see the acquisition process occasionally as being laborious, possibly. But this process, the strategic sourcing, is supposed to help and enhance the process optimization. The expected benefits also include standardization. The process should promote standardization of acquisition processes across the agency, especially in larger organizations. Sometimes, at least in my experience, I found that processes within agencies were not always the same. Acquisition processes varied, and that could be very confusing to not only the acquisition folks, but also to the customers that are being served. So again, this should enhance standardization and hopefully does across the agency. And then there's something that we call enterprise collaboration. Very interesting word. But it's supposed to, it addresses the idea that acquisition should be a collaborative process. We should not be purchasing, for instance, in fiefdoms. And those of you that are involved in larger agencies, and even in smaller ones, in my own experience, there were often fiefdoms within offices that would drive acquisition. And that's not always the best thing to do. So again, this process is supposed to enhance the collaboration. Okay, let me do very quickly some history of strategic sourcing. to bring everyone up to speed. The first memo that came out was back in 2005 under the Bush administration. And OMB came out with a memo that was entitled Implementing Strategic Sourcing. Now, I don't know how many of you, again, not many have been directly involved in strategic sourcing, but it's interesting to me at least that this memo came out 9 years ago. And in some cases, strategic sourcing is still developing. In 2005, I was working at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I was in an acquisition position, and I didn't even know that this memo had come out, to be perfectly honest, okay? I don't know that I was that much out of touch. I just don't think that our agency was focused on it, and I suspect many other agencies were in the same position. Beginning in January of 2006, the agencies were supposed to submit annual reports to OFPP, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within OMB, on reductions that were realized in the prices of goods and services that were being bought, improvements in performance, and any changes in achievement of the socioeconomic acquisition goals resulting from strategic sourcing. It's an interesting part of that memorandum where in 2005, OMB did recognize that there could be potentially an impact on socioeconomic, or the success of socioeconomic goaling. The Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative was also begun in 2005 in November, and that was in direct response, obviously, to the OMB memorandum. The primary goals of the FSSI is to include strategically sourced acquisitions across federal agencies and establish mechanisms to increase total cost savings, value, and socioeconomic participation. Again, there's an emphasis on the socioeconomic issue. The commodities that were initially included in the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative were express and ground domestic delivery services, office supplies, print management, telecommunications, expense management services, and wireless services. How many of you folks have heard of the FSSI or have used it? Okay, a handful. Then the GAO got involved. The GAO came out with a report a number of years later on strategic sourcing, and this was September of 2012, so not that long ago. And what the GAO did is they examined 4 agencies: DoD, Department of Homeland Security, the VA, and the Department of Energy. They were asked to look at their strategic sourcing programs to see how well these programs were actually being run and the results or the outcomes that were actually being achieved. And what they found, quite frankly, is that the agencies were not leveraging their buying power. And the buying power, of course, goes back to if we have many, many people wanting to buy the same item or service, we should be getting lower prices, right? The buying power plus the size of the budgets, and the acquisition budgets in particular of those larger agencies, gives them pretty significant buying power. The leading companies in the private sector, which by the way have been using strategic sourcing for a number of years, they pretty much strategically source about 90% of their total spend. So about 90 cents of every dollar they spend is strategically sourced. It is through a strategically sourced acquisition vehicle, the private sector. What the GAO found is that in the government, strategic sourcing was only being done with about 5% of the spend. So there was a huge gap. There was a huge difference between what the private sector and the public sector were doing in strategic sourcing. And the GAO report finally said that government-wide strategic sourcing could result in savings of more than $50 billion a year annually. So it's a pretty significant amount of money. In December of 2012, which was only a few months after that September GAO report, the OMB came out with a new memo, and this is under the Obama administration. And this OMB memo was entitled Improving Acquisition Through Strategic Sourcing. And what this memo instructed and what it addressed is that it included that guidance builds on the successful efforts to date, and it establishes a broad strategic sourcing initiative. It began to build on what had been begun a number of years earlier. It designated a strategic sourcing accountable official for each agency, the 24 CFO Act agencies. It established an interagency strategic sourcing leadership council, and that is intended to lead the government in these efforts to embrace and enhance the strategic sourcing programs. It defines characteristics of a strategic sourcing vehicle, and it directs that the small business opportunities be increased. Again, the small business theme keeps coming through. And then finally, most recently, the GAO came out with a report on strategic sourcing in January of this year, and it is entitled, Selected Agencies Should Develop Performance Measures on the Inclusion of Small Businesses, and OMB should improve the monitoring. Basically what GAO was saying was that the agencies are not measuring their success, they have not developed adequate performance measures in the area of strategic sourcing, and that the OMB needed to take a closer look at how agencies were measuring success and what savings are really being realized. And they also recommended that agencies work together to put together appropriate performance measures for strategic sourcing. I know in my own experience, performance measures can be challenging, to say the least. And what I found in my own experience was that we often measure something because we can. What we should be measuring are the important things and what processes actually are helping us achieve the goals that have been set. So again, there was a renewed emphasis just 2 months ago through this GAO report. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob, and Bob is going to talk about the VA experience in creating a strategic sourcing program.
Good morning. Like I said, I'm Bob Jones. I'm with the Department of Veteran Affairs, formerly Air Force, so I'm back home. It's kind of funny. I started out in small purchases at Scott Air Force Base when I first went into contracting, and a lot of it is just a matter of perspective. And it's funny to me that the higher you go in terms of dollar values, the terminology gets more specific. And now we call what we're talking about economy of scale. And whenever I first started out, it was called quantity discount. So, try not to get intimidated. And Mark and I were talking earlier while we were waiting to come up, that it's a lot of matter of perspective. What we're doing is really no different than what folks are doing at base level or systems level and some of the others. A lot of the procedures is the same thing. You get intimidated when you start adding extra zeros onto the end of the number, but at the end of the day, the procedures are coming out of the FAR, local directives, and people get intimidated as you go. So I've learned over my 25 years of doing contracting that as long as you keep that in perspective, it's just a different chapter in the FAR, and it's maybe another instruction letter that you have to read or a different signature that you have to get, but the processes are similar. So don't get intimidated by that. As said, I'm with the Department of Veteran Affairs. The Department of Veteran Affairs is an extremely large agency. We have approximately 330,000 people. One of the slides on here will say 278, but we borrowed that from the VHA, Veteran Healthcare Administration, and the slide was from 2008, so we've grown since then. As the chart says right here under the Veteran Affairs, we have the Office of Acquisition, Logistics, and Construction. If you want to relate that to DOD, that's probably close to AT&L. Underneath that is the Office of Acquisition Operations. That's our headquarters up in D.C. And I work at the Strategic Acquisition Center, which is in Fredericksburg, Virginia, about 50 miles south of D.C., so it's right between Richmond, Virginia and D.C. This chart here is really a summary. This is the delegation, us implementing at the Veteran Affairs. The Secretary, Secretary Shinsinki, retired General Shinsinki, is the Secretary of Veteran Affairs, and he's been delegated this responsibility, as Mark said, and in turn it goes down the chain of command to us to go ahead and implement. A lot of the stuff that's on here is common sense. It's stuff that we should be doing regardless of what office we're in, but the things that I wanted to pull out that I think are important in the first column is leveraging technology to ensure that enterprise management approach. Leveraging technology, that assists us greatly because it helps us do our job, but in Veteran Affairs, since we're treating disabled veterans and have to ensure that they get the best, we also have to rely on industry to work with us to ensure that we're driving the best technology that's available to meet our needs. Too often in contracting, regardless of what organization I was in, we have a tendency to kind of be arrogant and think that we know what we want. Our customers seem to know what we want, but too often we fail to go out to industry, whether it be a statement of objective, and ask the industry what's the best thing. You do it for a living, we do contracts acquisition for a living. Why don't you tell us what's out there, and why don't you tell us what's best to meet our needs? So let them assist you, and all too often, we have the perception that we're not allowed to talk to contractors and talk to the industry, and that's not true in a lot of instances. There are restrictions, but often we have a lot more leverage to discuss possibilities and get ideas and clarifications from them than we really capitalize on, and as such, we make our jobs more difficult, and it takes longer to get the work done, and often, the end product, if we rely on our own knowledge, isn't the best that we could possibly get or the most up-to-date technology. In the second column, it just substantiates what Mark was saying in the previous slides. We're pursuing standardization, and that's very critical for us, and we have to find that fine line between what the doctors want and then the technicians that are using the equipment, and still ensuring that we comply with the SECR rules, Competition Contracting Act, justify the sole source brand name, and no matter where you're at, you still have those same issues that we deal with regardless of what office you're working in. But standardization, when you're talking about hospitals and medical treatment, some of the things that we discuss at round tables is sitting down and we're buying an intricate piece of equipment. Some is sole source, some is not sole source. But if it's not sole source and the doctor has a preference that he wants, are we going to try to force in multiple different pieces of equipment because this one, was the best buy at this time, and then the doctor has to go into an operating room and make a determination, when he's performing surgery, are the buttons on the left or are the buttons on the right? So these are things that we take into consideration when we're doing it. So then we leverage the standardization enterprise-wide, and that helps out a lot, especially if you're doing, nationwide CONUS, OCONUS, because we have locations overseas we support as well. And then the strategic sourcing actually helps out because we set up the larger contracts. The next slide is basically just a summary of what the org chart, I want to carry it down and said under the office we have OAO, it has their mission, and I'm not going to read it to you. And underneath that's the office that I work in, which is the Strategic Acquisition Center in Fredericksburg. Our tasker is to leverage the enterprise-wide contracts that are non-IT related. Under OAO, the IT is done out of Georgia. Okay, this is a map that I borrowed from VHA, and it gives you an idea of how the VA is broken up and who we are supporting in enterprise contracting. At the top up here it says 22 divisions. Divisions are essentially regions that are broken down according to volume. Whenever we're doing our research on the contracts to determine, some of the things that we take a look at is what areas have the highest volume of veterans that we're supporting. Some of the common sense areas, Los Angeles is the biggest, New York, Texas, some of the places where you have the highest volume of retirees. Overseas, that can be challenging because often when you're dealing with putting enterprise contracts together and we're using tools such as GSA schedules, often GSA schedules may not be in that location as well, and we have to work around that. So that's some of the challenges that I'll discuss a little later. As I said before, the VA has over 150 hospitals that we support, VA employees. Again, now it's up to this older chart, about 300 to 330 employees, or 330,000 employees. Of that, under the Veterans Healthcare Administration, which we buy for the hospitals, about 80% of our the VA's employees work for that. Next, this is a pretty common sense chart, and it's even though we use it, in our forecasting, it's not unlike the things that you probably do yourselves. You have to sit back and make a determination of what you want, and at the larger scale in enterprise, Mark kind of covered the process on that. It's a little more in-depth process. At certain dollar values, you have to put integrated process teams together. And whenever we put the teams together, it's not unlike whenever I was in the Air Force and we had BRAG groups or business requirements groups. You pull in the different functional grouping, have them give their input, make a determination of how it's affected, and I'll have a chart here in a little bit that's an iceberg chart, and it'll explain some of the things that we discuss whenever we're having the IPTs. But from the what we're buying, go back and determine how we're going to buy it. How we're buying, it's pretty difficult at the larger level because we have so many choices on contracts, but in the VA, some of the limitations that I'll discuss at the larger agency is a regulatory guidance that we have to follow dealing with small business. We have to deal with small business, we have to deal with service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses and veteran-owned small businesses. We've been tasked by the Veteran Affairs that we will do 44% of all of our business with service-disabled veterans or veteran-owned small businesses. So in addition to the difficulties that we put together, trying to put large contracts together, trying to meet the quotas that we have, is also a challenge. Then we go back to, for whom are we buying? Who is our customer? That's where the IPT comes in, that we have all the functional areas that come in and help us decide this. And then go down and say, who are we buying from? And those are the challenges whenever you have the limitations that we'll discuss. This chart here, I like this chart because it kind of gives a perspective. All too often, one of the things that we only consider is the price, and ensure that we're getting the best price for the government, and not taking into consideration all the other things that are involved in the process. This is kind of a cheat sheet for me and for a lot of the other folks that we do, because whenever we're sitting down, putting a requirement together and working in the IPT, we take a look at this chart and sit back and see if there's things that we're forgetting, to take in consideration. And once the contract's together, it's a lot harder to fix it after the fact than it is to fix it up front. And later on today, we're going to be speaking to the industry representatives. And this is also something that we're going to discuss with them, because it's not just something we use to put our requirements together, but it also gives the industry a perspective of where we're at and the things that we have to deal with, and allows them to work with their risk management and put their business plans together to be able to support us and understand what we need so that they can better support us when we're partnering with industry. The next chart. This chart here is a tool that we use whenever we're doing it's almost the forecasting, 5-year forecast, 3-year, 5-year forecasting, sometimes out to 10-year forecasting, to determine what we consider success at different points during the process. We currently put together, and I'll discuss that in some of the successes we did. We put a temporary administrative support and contract together that was about $206 million. And one of the problems we're running into here, whenever you look and you say on the lateral line, it's spin coverage. The cost that we're putting together on this is significant early on in the process, and then we have the problems that everyone has is resistance to change. We put in a new enterprise-wide contract. If Veteran Affairs doesn't make it a mandatory contract, then we actually have to go out and market our contracts. And nationwide, we have to go to customers who are used to doing their own businesses, contracting officers out in the field, and say, we have this new contract that we put together, and we would like for you to use it. And they're telling us, well, you wrote it off of a GSA contract. Why is it not more cost effective for me to go to GSA myself and get it done, and I don't have to worry about your cumbersome processes that you all are going through? And essentially, we've decentralized the process out to the field on these contracts and trying to market them and get them to understand that for the temporary administrative support contract that we did, we have savings that are estimated between 7% and 24% below the GSA pricing. So marketing, we have to show them the things that Mark brought up on the other thing is, what is the cost savings? What's the benefits? Can you get it quicker? Are there other processes that we have to do when we put these contracts? So those are considerations we have to do is because we have to not only put good contracts together, but we have to put contracts together, which I'll discuss a little further back, contracts that folks are willing to use. So when you look at this chart right here and you say the spin coverage and you go up and at 40%, we're spending a significant amount of money on the contract right now, trying to put it together. We have 8 contractors that are on the contract, all small disadvantaged veteran-owned businesses, and trying to convince our customers in the field to use it. So right now we have about 10 customers nationwide, which is not a lot, and we're doing marketing campaigns to get them to understand that they can save money in their budget by using our contract, and here's the benefit. Some of the challenges we have at the enterprise level are the same challenges that you have anywhere. Pall time, and starting out managing customer expectations. Give an example of some of the stuff that we have to deal with is in perceptions. We have folks that come into the Strategic Acquisition Center that hasn't done enterprise-wide contracting before, and their concepts are based on base level, some of the different agencies they've been in. So the temporary administrative support contract, which we just awarded for $206 million, it was awarded off of utilizing GSA schedules. It has a cascading approach, which I'll describe when we get there. And it's very, very innovative, but it's very difficult. Sitting back and there's limitations on the contracting since it's temporary administrative support. There's a public law that says that if you have administrative support that you're hiring under government contracts, that you're limited to 120 days. And the purpose for the temporary administrative support contract is to allow you to make a determination whether you want to hire these folks in as FTEs or establish full-time positions, or whether you want to get rid of it at all and absorb it under some of the other functions in the office. So the perception is that if you're hiring administrative support, it's a simple concept. It's off of GSA. Why can't you get this done within 90 days? So it's $206 million, and I'm good, but I can't do one in that period of time. The processes that we have in the Veteran Affairs, some of the things that we have to go through is doing the different evaluations and reviews of the contract. And I brought a cheat sheet over from the Navy that has an expanded milestone chart and brought it over, and we integrated it into our operation, showing the different individual steps that you have to go through and what the expected timeline is. Just our evaluations and reviews alone were 2 months. So if we did 2 months worth of reviews on the contract, then that left us 1 month to do a $206 million contract. That's also posting it out for competition, bringing it back and doing a source selection, which on this specific one was a trade-off source selection. In retrospect, it probably should have been low price technically acceptable, but as a trade-off, by the time we got done doing worldwide, excuse me, the source selection report was almost 400 pages long. So doing all this process is the managing customer expectations, and often sometimes our own boss's expectations we have to educate them on what the process is and be realistic. So those are some of the managing customer expectations we deal with. Customers, especially dealing with hospital equipment, want us to get what they want us to get. And again, it's not a matter of bumping heads with them, it's a matter of educating our customers that, we have certain rules that we have to follow by, but, we'll try to meet you in the middle and accommodate your request the best that we can, but you're also a partner in this and you need to do the justification yourself. If you say, that I want this specific piece of hospital equipment because, it's the best one I've ever used, not sufficient. So that's where you have to educate your customers. Developing contractual vehicles that the customers will use. I've already covered that one and won't cover it at length again, but trying to decide which type contracts. Some of the things that we have to make a determination dealing with the small businesses and SDVOSBs, VOSBs, veteran-owned, and disabled veterans is that we deal with an ACS code. And at certain levels of success for contracts, they graduate out of their NACS code and all of a sudden their category jumps from a small business to a large business. So we have to take in consideration that we're not going to hurt those companies by, forcing their business plan to graduate sooner than they're really ready to graduate. And also, we're not in business of putting small businesses out of business is what it amounts to. Marketing the vehicle. That's what we're doing on our contracts. The Strategic Acquisition Center has only been around for 2 years, and a lot of our contracts are fairly new, and we're having to sell ourselves as the new kids on the block and convince our customers in the Veteran Affairs that the contracts that we're putting together are the best to support them and save them money. Navigating regulatory systems. I briefly went over that. Small business set-aside rules. We have to justify pretty much everything we're doing, and that's part of the process that delays us. We have to go up, and if we're using other than small business, we have to go to the SES level at the project management office and get them to sign off, acknowledging that they're okay with us going to and agree, with our rationale for having to go to a large business as opposed to a small business. Non-manufacturer's waiver. Often whenever we're dealing with small businesses, it's hard to find a small business that is a manufacturer of products, but there are ones out there. Some of the confusing rules that we deal with. If you have 2 or more small businesses or manufacturers, then we can do a small business set aside. If you have none, then we can go get a small business manufacturer waiver and still go to the small business. If we have one that's a manufacturer, then we can't do either, and we have to go open market. So it's almost a flow chart that we have to have showing all the different decision processes that we have to be able to do this at enterprise level. Another thing that I put up here, GSA Federal Supply Schedule rates. And there's a lot of rules with GSA that I would say whenever I got into the larger contracts, I wasn't even aware of how they operate. But GSA can be your friend. Contact the representatives there, and if you're having issues with contracts, such as you're getting ready to put a contract together and it's a schedule. For the longest time in my career, I wasn't aware that whenever I looked at the schedule and it had an expiration date, and I was trying to put a contract for 5 years or a BPA together for 5 years, and the schedule said it had expired in 3 years, how do I work this? Then I called GSA one day and they said, well, actually, that is the base year that you're reading there, because we have 5-year bases and we have 4 or 5-year options. So a lot of GSA's contracts they put together, unbeknownst to us, was 25-year contracts, 20-year contracts, and whenever you look at the expiration date, it's actually not expiring, and then you can go ahead and award the contract with the understanding that GSA will award the contract. Some of the successes that we've had in the Veteran Affairs for large contracts and putting enterprise-wide contracts together. At certain level, as I said before, we have to put IPTs together at several $1 million. IPTs are required, and since most offices did not have IPT facilitation, we put a contract together for $225 million that allows our customers enterprise-wide to bring in IPT facilitators to help us put the process together. The average savings on this contract by leveraging is approximately 35%. So when you're talking $225 million, that's a large sum for a 35% savings. Temporary administrative support contract that I discussed, that's $206 million. Again, we saved between 7% to 24%. Another contract that we did was event planning, and this was brought about because GSA, for lack of better terms, got hammered for one of the conferences that a lot of people are familiar with by overspending and doing a lot of lavish things. I wasn't aware of some of the VA being new in the VA, but right after GSA, they dropped the hammer on GSA, VA also had theirs. And what a lot of people don't realize is when you see this, they're usually isolated incidences. You know, it's one contract like the $300 hammer, $600 toilet seat that folks always talk about. You know, we will always be known as the people that put the conferences together. So to avoid this, we put together a event planning contract that allows us to have a contractor or contractors manage our enterprise-wide for anybody in the VA that wants to hold a contract or a conference. Urinary catheters, we put urinary catheters together. That was several $1 million. It was, I think, about $16 million. That's a good example of standardization. You know, some of the hospitals were using as many as 6 or 7 different companies to provide catheters and other medical supplies, and they weren't standard, so if the doctors transferred from hospital to hospital, the equipment was different, so that's the purpose of standardization. I covered managing customer expectations, and to summarize for Veteran Affairs, some of the things that we have coming down the pipes in the next couple of years. We're going to establish a medical surgical prime vendor contract that allows ordering officers to place orders in the field, so it decentralizes the process. So what we're doing is we're going to award a contract that allows us to take all the contracts, put them under one umbrella, and a contractor will manage the supplies where the different hospitals can call this person. They maintain a specific stock of the items, and whenever they need them, he facilitates the delivery of the items, facilitates keeping the stock. Another one is a multi-agency contract for the Veteran Affairs Academy that's right outside the door here. They have a display. And for our Veteran Affairs Academy, we're putting together a large contract for curriculum development. And once we started putting it together and we put out the request for information, a lot of other agencies have contacted us from the White House to several other different DOD, wanting to know if they can also join us in this contract, so it's graduated up. And continue to increase efficiency as we move along, because anything from 15 to 20% savings is defined as success in Veteran Affairs. Mark?
I want to just briefly go through the NRC experience in putting together a strategic sourcing program. And I guess what I would do is just ask you, you're 1102, so you've got a lot of creative juices flowing through you, I know that. So what I'd like you to do is visualize a pie chart, right? Everybody knows what a pie chart looks like, right? And in that pie chart, there's basically 4 areas of spend. And basically those 4 areas of spend for the NRC are information technology is about 32% of total spend. Technical assistance and research is about 30% of total spend. And corporate support is about 35% of agency spend. And these we refer to lovingly as buckets. And what we did is we did a spend analysis where we found out over a 3-year period how much money we spent, what we were buying, and who we were buying it from. And then we took that information and put it into buckets. And this is all part of the process in approaching enterprise-wide contracting, right? Because at this point, it's all done fairly in a fragmented fashion. So again, if you envision that pie chart, the 4th one, I'm sorry, is education and training. That was our 4th one, and that's very small. That was only 3%, but we used that as a pilot. We piloted a education and spend approach through enterprise-wide contracting, and then from that we began the process of looking at the other 3 major areas.